Okay. So our plan is to build a Rails application from scratch. So we're getting away from our simple store, and we're going to build sort of a fake version of Twitter, but very, very limited. My server-side students have seen this before. This is just the single user Twitter, where you have a web page which displays tweets. You have a form where you can type in a tweet, and you have a button where you can submit that tweet. And so I can say, this is a tweet. I can submit it, and it appears down below. It's very limited because there's no users here, so it's really just a form that posts to another form or to another script, which adds to a database. This is the PHP version of it. This is sort of what we're going to end up cloning. So if we view source, we can see that it's quite a simple HTML5 document, which sort of within a wrapper div, we have a form, which is posting to a PHP script, and we have two inputs, one for the tweet itself and one for the button. And then down below, we have an unordered list of the tweets that exist in the system. Backend wise, we have a database, which is very simple. If we look at the structure of the database, it has a ID column, which is an integer primary key, auto-incrementing, and a status column, which is a varchar, and that's it. If we try to submit a tweet of 0 length, we get an error message, and that also occurs if we try to submit a tweet of over 140 characters. So that's what we're going to clone, but we're going to do it in Rails. The only sort of new kind of information I'll be adding to what we've previously done in Rails is I'm going to, for my views, be using Haml instead of ERB, and I'm going to present a new built-in hash called the flash hash, and that's going to allow us to use these kind of status messages for displaying errors and success messages. So there's the goal. So I'm also going to keep track of the application on GitHub. So I'm going to create a new repository, which I will call fake Twitter, and I'll make it for our other section here. Simplified Twitter app built using Rails. So it's public. Create the repo. Create the new Rails app. Rails new fake Twitter, and then our course or our section number 91462. Okay, so this will create our sort of Rails blank app bundle install runs, but it has nothing to install as of yet because I've got all the gems on my system. And so as soon as this finishes execution, we'll go and check this initial Rails app into our new Git repository, fake Twitter 2, Git init. There's my new repository. Then I want to link it to this remote. Because I have SSH keys set up on my system, I could use the SSH remote. If you don't have keys, you have to use the HTTP one, and then ask for username and password. But I'll be using this one. So it's just this one line I need to do here to add the remote. And now I can add, I can commit, say initial commit of a new Rails app. This will be the fake Twitter app. And I can push it. What? Oh, I have to actually specify origin master. And I only need to specify that once when I give the -u command. So I want to push to origin from my master. That should do what I want it to do, and now from this point on, just typing git push will do the same. Go back over to GitHub, we can see that it's picked up my Rails app. one of the things that happens on GitHub when you check in a new Rails app like this is it'll automatically find the README file that's in there, and it will display that README file down below. If I want to replace that with my own README, I could either edit this README file, or I could create one of a different format, and I'm just going to show you what we can use. I don't tend to use this RDoc format, which is a type of text markup for Ruby documents, but I'm going to delete that file. So I'm going to say git rm readme.rdoc. And then in that folder, which is right here, I'm going to create a new file called readme.md. The MD stands for Markdown, which is a markup language that generates HTML, but it's highly simplified. So instead of writing something like an H1 and then a header that said like fake Twitter or something like that, for my headers, I use hash marks. This will be a H1, this will be an H2, this will be an H3. So I can say fake Twitter app. Then I can write in here, this is a Rails application that implements a simple single user Twitter. If I want to make a link, for example, if I wanted to link this to the actual Twitter website, I could make it into a link like this. The square braces represent the link text, the parentheses represent the actual link itself. And then I could say something, this was built as a demo for the RC e-commerce WebD 2000 class. And if, for example, I wanted RRC to be in bold, I could put asterisks around it. I can now check this into my repository. Added a markdown README file, and I can push it. And there's a bit of a whatever. GitHub will see this. It'll see that it's an MD file, and it will render it as HTML. So when I go back to my repository, fake Twitter app, that's an H1. You can see that is turned into a link, and the RSC has been bolded. So everything on GitHub is Markdown enabled. So if you add an issue or you comment on something, anywhere you sort of have user inputted text on GitHub, you can input Markdown, and it will automatically turn it into this kind of enhanced HTML for you. There are a number of really nice Markdown gems that you can add to your Rails projects, and then you can do things like what I have set up for my Manitoba election website, which is, if I go to pages here, if I go, for example, and look at this page, this is what it looks like on the website. It's just an HTML page. But from the back end, when I edit it, I'm not editing it as HTML. I'm editing it as Markdown. And so when I have a list of links, this is my list of links. It makes the hrefs for me. These are my headers. This will be an H2 because it has 2 hash marks in front of it. All of the links inside of it look like that. It's just sort of a nice way of writing HTML without having to really write HTML. So it's sort of an in-between between going sort of full WYSIWYG and or forcing your users to use HTML. It's a nice in-between. I try to use Markdown for most of my things. Like this is really nice. This gets turned into a table. So you just write it out like this, because HTML tables are super annoying to create. So instead you just write it out like this, like an ASCII table, and that generates a beautiful table for you. So it's a really nice little system. It's called Markdown. Markdown. So if you search for Markdown, you'll see it was created by this guy right here, John Gruber. And basically the syntax is available here, and there's this thing called the Dingus, which lets you sort of practice. You can write Markdown stuff, and it'll turn it into HTML.
You add it to your...
There's a bunch of different gems that you can add
okay.
that will allow you to do Markdown. And then here's, things like making things italicized. You can sort of wrap an element in single asterisks, bold is double asterisks, links look like this, lists are just like asterisks. It's just a really nice way of not having to write full out HTML.
And so like in your Manitoba elections there, you're doing that through active admin?
Yes.
And then your active admin post, I guess you would say, turns it into an MD file?
No, it actually leaves it in the database as Markdown. And then when it gets rendered out by way of my view, I have like a little helper in my view that pre-processes it as Markdown.
Okay.
But yeah, it's nice. I really like using it. And once you get used to Markdown, you'll see that it's used in a lot of places. I think it's like Reddit comments, I think, are Markdown enabled. And all of sort of the comments and issues on GitHub are Markdown enabled as well. Okay, so that's the beginning. We now have a Rails application. I'm going to open up two other command prompt windows to the same folder. One's going to be for my Rails server. The other is going to be for a Rails console. And I've got the third one already open just for typing purposes, for Git and for my generation commands. Once the server is up and running, I should now be able to do localhost and see that welcome to Rails page, which is good. And I get some information about my application environment. I can see I'm at Rails 4.02, Ruby 1.93, etc. Okay, for step one, I'm not going to use scaffolding for this application, so I'm going to want to create a model, and the model is going to represent a tweet, and a tweet's going to be sort of the same as it is on the PHP version of the site. Primary key, there's going to be a status. The Rails version will have an added created at and updated at columns as well. So to create that, I'm going to do a Rails generate model. The model is called tweet singular, and it's going to have a status column, which is a string. And that's it. The ID is created automatically for me. The created at and updated are created automatically for me. So that'll run, and then after that runs, I'm going to run the migration, which will be generated along with this model. And that will actually create my tweets table with all the correct columns. Break db migrate. Okay. Let it do its thing. There we go. So from my console, I could reload exclamation mark and just have a quick look at what it is to be a tweet. So tweet.new shows me that a tweet has an ID, status, created at, updated at. I might go ahead and create a few tweets just so I have something in my database to start with. So tweet.create status. This was my first tweet. That creates one tweet. And this was my second tweet. That creates another. Tweet.count tells me that there's now 2 tweets in my database. Good. So I've got some data in there, which will be nice for when I've got my initial view up and running. I can build the index view without having to worry about creating any tweets yet, because I already have 2 in the system. Okay, so now I need a controller, because without a controller, the end user won't be able to interact with my model, right? It's MVC, where the user's interacting with a controller by way of some views, and then the model is accessed by way of the controller actions. So I'll do a get status, and I'll check in what I have here. Added a tweet model and ran the migration. And now I'm going to do a Rails generate controller. I'm going to call it tweets. It's sort of convention to name your controller after the database table that you're going to be interacting with the most. And so this will be a controller for tweets. And I really only need 2 actions. I'm going to have one action which is going to bring me to the sort of the main index page that'll display tweets and display a form. And then I want another action where this form is going to post its data to. And so going with the Rails conventions, I'm going to call one of those actions index and the other one create. I don't need a new because the index is effectively serving as both the index and the new. It has the form on it. So this will create a controller file in my app controllers folder. It'll also create a tweets subfolder in the views folder. Into that folder, it will put in an index and create view. And it will also put a couple methods into the generated controller, and it will add a couple routes to my routing file. I want to sort of undo some of the things that it has done for me automatically. One of the things I want to undo is in the views folder, I want to delete the create view because I don't need it. All the create is going to do is it's going to take in the data posted from this form, and after it's done the creation, it's just going to redirect back to the index. So creation doesn't need its own view. So I can delete the create view. I'm also going to edit the generated routes. So I'm going to go to my config folder, and I'll open up my routing file in my editor here. These 2 routes were created for me. I'm going to remove them. And I'm going to use the Rails resources command to generate some RESTful resources. So normally if I just said resources tweets, that would generate for me routes for the index, a new, a create, an edit, an update, and a destroy. All of those would be sort of routed properly for me. The index would be a collection route, and the create, edit, update, and destroy would all be member routes, meaning they would have IDs in them. I only need an index and a create. And so what I'm going to ask the resources command to do is to create the resources for tweets, but really only the index and create ones will be required. So that'll build the routes for me. I can go to the console and type rake routes to see what they're going to look like. It's a handy command. Yeah, it's very good to take a peek at sort of what it's doing the routing. Yeah.
One other thing I found that is maybe sometimes faster is if you just put junk in the URL bar or whatever.
Oh, it'll show you your routing.
Roll the roads.
Oh, nifty. So if you do like just go to somewhere else, something that doesn't exist,
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
there's the routes. Haha, yes. Yeah, that's a new thing. And in fact, I think this is probably like you can sort of type in things and it'll see what matches. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a very handy tip. Thanks. So yeah, if you just put in a route that doesn't exist, it is much faster than typing rake routes. So
There's a real command for it too,
I don't know either. I think this is fairly new to Rails. Like I don't think this was part of Rails 3. Here we can see that we have 2 routes that are both using /tweets as a URL. One of them, if it gets a GET request to /tweets, it's going to load up the index, and a POST request to /tweets is going to load up the create. That's looking good. I might also want a route that's just my root route. So I'm going to add that as well. I'm going to make it so that both /tweets and just the root both go to the index. So I will add that here. I will say root tweets index. Okay, that means now going to my root for my project, it loads this up. Good, that's inside of this index.html.erb file. Now I said I was going to use Haml instead of regular ERB. So to do that, I have to go and edit my gem file. This is the file that lists all the gems that Rails is going to be using, and you can see Rails itself has been used in here, SQLite, Sass. I can add to this. I'm going to add right here that I want to include the gem for Haml. And now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to stop my server, because we noticed this morning that once I added Haml, I needed to restart the server. It's one of the very few times that you actually have to do that. And then to get Ruby to install the appropriate Haml gem, I'm going to run bundle install. And what this is Bundler. It's the program that looks at this gem file and makes sure you have all the correct gems. And so you can see now Haml is included. And now I can restart my server. Okay, so I'm going to go to the app views folder on my path here into the tweets folder. We have this index.html.erb. I want this to be .haml instead. So I'm going to use git to move it from index.html.erb to index.html.haml. Oh, but it's not currently under version control, which is good. That means I can just change it like this. .haml. I should be able to now load it up inside of here. So a really quick introduction to Haml. Haml simplifies the generation of HTML. And so on the left here, we see some ERB code that you might see in a Rails view. We have a section tag that has a class of container. Inside of it, we have an H1 and an H2, both of which include ERB echo statements, and then a div with a class on it that also includes an ERB echo statement. The equivalent Haml looks like this. So when creating tags inside of Haml, you just do % and the name of the tag. If you want something to have a class, you add a dot class name to it. When you want something to echo out the contents of a variable, so in this case, generating an H1, we say %H1, and then we just follow that by an equal sign, and then this is what's going to be echoed into it. And the default tag it creates is a div. So if you just provide a class, well, then it straight up turns it into a div. The individual tags do not need to be closed. Everything is white space sensitive. So the fact that these things are indented below section means they belong to section. And we'll see in a few moments when I start putting in things like conditionals and loops, we don't need to use end statements for those either. So normally where you would have a Ruby end, you don't need those as well. It's interesting to use something like Haml because it lets you know what it might feel like to be a Python programmer, because Python has this kind of meaningful white space where you don't have to use ends with your if statements or your loops. It's all white space based. Did you have
So when you use the Haml gem in place of ERBs, it goes to the .haml files?
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you want to get rid of your ERB files and replace them with
If you
Haml.
accidentally leave them both in, is it can go to the ERB first?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And so, although we're not going to need to keep this as it is, I'm just going to do a quick transformation to turn this into Haml, just as an example. So instead of doing an H1 manually with the open and close tags, I would say %H1. And I can either, when it's a single line, I can just do it directly after. And then a %P here. Again, I could either do it directly after, or for something like a paragraph tag, I could indent it below. This should create my H1 and my P. And so let's just make sure this still, oops, that's the wrong one, still works. If I view source, it's correctly generating the right markup for me. That's good. I can now commit that into Git. git status. That's a git add dot. Git commit -m. Added the tweets controller and the Haml gem. Okay. At this point, it might also be nice to convert my application layout into a Haml equivalent. So in the app views folder, in the layouts, I have this document here, which is a HTML5 document. I want to turn it into a Haml document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use git to rename it. So I'm going to say I'll move to the app views layouts folder, and I'll say git move application.erb to application.haml. I'll have to close it here. New, and open it up. The doc type, we use that to create an HTML5 document. To create an HTML tag is going to be this. Oops, no. This. To create a head tag, I'm going to do that. To create a title tag, I'm going to do this. And I'll make my title a little nicer by putting some spaces in it. And deleting that. The style sheet include, well, this is just going to be 3 echo statements, and I can get rid of the trailing closing tag for each one of them.
So the echo, you just have equals.
You got it.
Nice.
So the echoes just become equals. The closing of the head goes away because these things are only part of the head because they're indented below it. The body now becomes a body. This now just becomes a yield, like this, and then these go away. Nice, it's much more simplified. Takes a little bit of a while to get used to using Haml, but once you do, I'm fairly convinced you won't want to go back. I don't like writing HTML anymore just because I find it to be extra verbose. Even though these days like Komodo will automatically add my end tags, which it didn't used to, I still like the sort of the conciseness of a file like this. Let's just make sure I haven't broken everything. So let's go and look to see if it's still doing what it needs to do. And it is, except for this. I haven't properly nested my code under the HTML tag. Notice the HTML tag is opening and closing immediately. And so that means that everything here needs to be indented inside of the HTML tag. There we go. That's much better.
Oh.
Meaningful.
So you didn't have a closing tag before?
Yes, what was happening? I'll show you. Without this, if we view source and reload it, it was opening and closing immediately.
Oh.
And that was because I wasn't indented below it.
Huh.
And so by indenting, now all of these things belong to that tag.
I like that.
It's quite nice. And so, and you can still, like, as long as you're properly indented, the body doesn't have to, the yield doesn't have to be directly below the body. You can still have some white space and it still deals with it properly. But I tend to almost always just sort of do things like that. Nice, concise HTML5 application layout. There is the Rails world. I keep opening this wrong one here. The Rails world is a little bit fashion driven. For every gem that is popular today, there's always a new one that's coming out to sort of displace it. So although I'm still using Haml, there is a movement in the Rails community to move towards something called Slim. And so as a Rails programmer, you get to learn new things all the time, whether you like it or not. And so just to show you what Slim's all about, this is what a Slim document looks like.
Or even less.
It's even less, so it's slimmer, right? It's for creating your tags, you don't need the percent anymore. It's quite nice. Here's like an unless statement with an else. I won't go into the details, but it is actually it's nicer in a lot of respects, especially for adding attributes onto tags. There's a bit of a clumsy syntax in Haml for adding extra attributes other than IDs and classes onto tags, and Slim sort of fixes those things. And so if you want to, for your project, if you haven't already started using Haml, you might want to look into Slim. I'm so far still in the Haml world. Maybe when I build up the next version of Manitoba Election, I'll try using Slim and see if I like it.
Does Haml support embedded JavaScript?
I don't know. Like this here.
Yeah, it seems like that's something that they're bragging about.
Yeah, they've got it right there. So I don't know, but it's pretty neat. So I'll let you know how it goes if I start using it. And I'm not even sure exactly about some of the syntax, like why there's a double equals here. Nonetheless, this is I've noticed some people starting to move towards using Slim. We'll be using Haml for today, though. Okay, so let's try to get it to the point where we can display tweets in an unordered list of tweets on our index page. So this is our index page. This means we're going to want to open up our controller, the tweets controller specifically. The index action, at the end of executing the index action, the Rails is going to automatically load the app views tweets index.html.haml. The create does not have an associated view. It will either redirect or render. It's either going to redirect to the index or render the index's view. To get a list of all of my tweets inside of the index view, I need to make them accessible by way of the index action. And so I can say @tweets equals tweet.all. And if I want them listed in sort of reverse chronological order, instead of all, I'd say order. And I can order in terms of the created at column in descending order. Truthfully, because I'm only allowing the creation of tweets and not like the editing of tweets, I could also order according to updated ad or even according to ID. All three of those would work to show me my tweets in reverse chronological order. Once I have that variable inside of my index action, it's going to be immediately available inside of my associated view. And so in the associated view, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to put in some embedded ERB, which if it doesn't echo out, I just use a dash. And I'm going to say if tweets.size is greater than, maybe, yeah, here, if tweets.size is 0, then make a paragraph tag that says there are currently no tweets in the system. Otherwise, I want to loop through my tweets. So I'm going to say tweets.each do tweet. And this is all going to be inside of a unordered list. Here I'm going to create an li, which I will use to echo out the tweet.status. Again, notice how concise this is compared to what you would create in a regular ERB document. In a regular ERB document, it would look similar. There would just be extra sort of stuff hanging around. There would be an extra end for that if-else statement. This would be my paragraph. This would be here. And there would be a close to that paragraph. Inside of the else, you would have your UL with the close to your UL. And then inside of that UL, you would have a tweets.eachDo tweet. And there would be a end associated with that. And then in here, you would have an LI into which you would echo your tweet status. Then you would close it, and then you would close your LI. Which do you prefer? Bit of a loaded question, but I definitely prefer this. It is easier for me to read, primarily because there's just less sort of cruft hanging around. I find that having these kind of less than percentages sort of scattered all around makes ERB hard to read. Whereas this, I find it to be quite easy to read, nice and concise. So I'll remove all of this. That was just there for example purposes. That's sort of the ERB equivalent. I should now be able to load up my tweets. And there they are. This was my second tweet, this was my first. They're indeed in reverse chronological order. So the second one appearing before the first. And you can see that's correctly displayed inside of a UL with individual LIs. If I wanted to test out this alternate path that tweets size 0, I could just go in here and temporarily overwrite my tweets variable to be an empty array. And now it really will have a size of 0, so that when this gets executed, we should see if this actually works. So I can go back over here, reload, and yes, it's turned into a paragraph tag instead of the UL. Same thing here. So that's just for testing purposes. I just overrode it to an empty array. Okay, so that's the index, and now the index is basically done. But I need to, start adding things like a form. But I'll go and check this into to Git. Maybe I'll step down a few. Okay, so here I can show you how I would split this into two separate commits, because one of the things that's outstanding here is the new application layout, which is Haml. The other stuff has to do with my index.html. Those are two separate things. So I'm going to do a git add, but I'm not going to do a dot. I'm going to just add in my layouts. Oops. .application.html.haml. I guess I have to type views instead of view. Yes. And it should be app. Now I have just those two things staged. My controller and index view are not staged. So when I commit, it's just going to commit my my layout. So converted the application layout into Haml. And now I can commit the rest, adding it, committing it, implemented the tweets index action and associated view. There we go. Now I want a form. So if we look at the site that we're cloning, which is this one here, it's got this form at the top of it. If I view source, it's a pretty simple form. I want to build that inside of my index view. I'm going to build that up here. So I'm going to say echo out a form which is built by form for. This is going to be a form for a tweet. I'm going to have to make this available in a moment by way of my controller. Do, and then give me the form builder variable. And then inside of that form, 2 spaces indent. I want the form builder to build me a text field for my status column and a submit button that says tweet in the button text. So before I can execute this, I need to make a tweet available, which is just a blank tweet. Tweet.new. And so now back to my system here. There it is, ready to go. If I view source, I can see it's built me a form that includes 2 inputs, one for the tweet status and one button that says tweet. That's going to post when I click submit to this /tweets URL, which exactly is what I want by way of my routing. I wanted to post to /tweets, so this form's ready to go. Knowing that it's ready to go, I can now intercept that data in this create action and use it to create new tweets. So I could say something along the lines of tweet equals tweet.new. Now in Rails 3, I could just take my params hash directly, and then I could say if tweet save, so if the save worked, then redirect to the action called index. Otherwise, render my index view. But in Rails 4, I have to go one step further and pre-process the params hash to ensure that I'm not opening myself up to what's called a mass assignment attack. I have to describe to the controller which of my parameters are permitted to be accessible from the outside world. And so I'll make a protected area here, because this is not an action I'm building, it's just a protected method. And I'm going to say tweet params.
This is strong parameters, right?
This is strong parameters, exactly. And I'm going to delete that. And here I'm going to return the params hash, where I'm going to require that there is data for a tweet, and I'm going to permit the status of that tweet to be accessible from the params hash. This is a security thing. It's mainly preventing people from crafting special forms and submitting them to our website and being able to access columns in the database that they shouldn't normally be able to access. The reason this is an issue, I keep opening the wrong one. The reason this is an issue is that any form that's displayed on a website can be altered, right? I can go in to this form inside of Chrome, and I can literally add new inputs. And I could, let's say there was a column called special that made tweets somehow special. Well, I could just give an input that was called tweet special, and it was of type text. And now there's an extra button or an extra input for me. I could submit that. If I didn't have the scrubbing or the permitted strong parameters, then the special would just be automatically put into the database in the special column.
Does Rails automatically scrub for like semicolons and stuff like that?
It does a lot of, like, if you're going to be passing things to active record and you're worried about like SQL injection syntax, it will do those kind of scrubs as long as you pass it to active record properly. And we'll talk about that in a few lectures. There's ways of using question marks in place of where you would actually put the data, and then later on referencing what needs to be put in place of those question marks. And that sort of allows Rails to do a bit of pre-processing for SQL injection attacks. The other thing it scrubs for is HTML. And so, for example, if someone wanted to or thought they were being clever, and for a tweet they inputted a script that said alert woot script, the tweet is being immediately displayed on my screen. So you'd think that maybe this would just be displayed and it would actually say, you know, trigger an alert. But thankfully, oh, what has happened here? Forbidden attributes error. I didn't actually use my strong parameters. Tweet params.
Oh, yeah.
So let's make sure this actually works first, and then I'll get rid of this for a moment. Test from the web. Test from the web works. Drop this in here, tweet. So it HTML entitizes it. If you wanted to live dangerously, which I don't recommend, you could do raw, which just lets sort of the unscrubbed data through. And so if I leave that as raw, it actually is a script tag that gets executed. So you typically don't want to. We used to have to always, for the explicit scrubbing, we used to in Rails have to do an H, and the H would do the scrubbing for us, and they just made it default. And so it's like, you just assume that you always want it scrubbed, and if you really want the raw stuff to come through, then you write raw.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
It makes more sense. Just scrub it by default. If we view source here, you can see these just been entitized, right? Less than, greater than. They've become the HTML entities, the quotes. It's a nice, safe way of handling things. Okay, we can now add tweets from the command prompt or from the web prompt. Another tweet from the web. There's a problem though, in that we can add empty tweets, which we don't want to do, or tweets over 140 characters, which we want to prevent as well. So I need some validations. So I'll do my Git stuff first. Implemented the create action for tweets. Notice I don't always have to push. What I could be doing is just committing all along, and the end of all of these commits I could push once for the day, and it would sort of take all of my recent commits and push. I've just gotten into the habit of pushing with my commits. Let's add some validations on the tweet model. So I'll say validates the status column such that the presence is true and such that the length has a maximum of 140 characters. So by having a presence of true, it has to be at least one character, and by limiting the length, now we have a maximum character count as well. So now from the web, I should just close that one down. Here we are, tweet, and this is an issue, but it's an issue for another reason. It's not because I tried to improperly add a invalid tweet. What's happened is I've got a undefined method size for nil class nil. Nil class nil errors are like the most common of Rails errors. They basically mean an object which you think is something is really nil, and you're trying to call, in our case, size on what you think is an array of tweets, or at least an active record collection of tweets, when it's in fact a nil object. Why do we have this nil object? Well, what's just happened is we've submitted an invalid tweet. So when tweet.save was called, that returns false. That's now rendering the index, and the index is expecting there to be a tweets variable, which isn't there. Inside of the create action, we only have a tweet variable. So if validation fails, we actually have to go and make our collection of tweets available so that it can be rendered as part of the index. So again, just to refresh you with the difference between a redirect and a render, a redirect is going to send the browser an HTTP status code of 302, which is a redirect. And so what it'll do is it'll instruct your browser to make a brand new HTTP GET request to the index. And so when you go to create and you've posted your form, what'll happen is that the form will get posted to the create action, and then immediately after, your browser will be told to go and reload the index by way of a GET request. So it ends up making two different HTTP requests. For a render, when you post to create, it's not going to redirect your browser. It's just going to display the view that's associated with the index. So this just displays the index.html.haml in the context of this action. That's why we need to have this @tweets variable accessible. So if we go back and now try to make a blank tweet, there you go.
But no error.
No error. So we need to invoke an error message now. Okay. It also bothers me that I have a blank tweet in there. I can get rid of that by way of my command prompt. I can go to my command prompt here. I can reload it. And tweet.last is, I think, the one that is the blank one. So I can say destroy. And that should get rid of that blank one. Good. So we need an error message to be displayed. And in fact, I'd like a success message also to be displayed along with the save. So if things work out well, I want it to say, you successfully submitted your tweet. If things don't work out so well, I want it to say, you know, okay, there's a problem here. You know, your tweet needs to be within a certain size. I'm going to have this message displayed inside of the layout. And here I can look a little bit forward in time to when we're going to be styling this site. And I can see that in the site that we're cloning, everything exists inside of a div with an ID of wrapper. And so I'm going to put that into my document here. Div is the default tag for Haml, so I can just say wrapper. I create IDs by using the hash mark. So the yield's going to be inside of there. And then what I'd like in here is if a success message occurs, I want a paragraph of type success with some message, with a success message being displayed. And then if an error occurred, I want a paragraph of type error with an error message displayed. And if I just load this up now, both of those will just sort of unconditionally be displayed. Oh, I need percents to turn them into actual things. There you go. View source. There's my success message. There's my error message. How I'm going to display them is going to be through something called the flash, which is a way of sort of stashing some strings into a special hash for display later. The reason I have to use this special kind of hash is it's especially important for the redirect, because we're about to redirect the browser to a whole new GET request, meaning the whole contents, all the variables that are inside of this create action are all going to disappear from scope because HTTP doesn't have any state. So if we're about to redirect the user to the index, how do we keep a success message around? Well, we can keep a success message around by doing this. We use the flash hash, it's just this thing called flash, and we say success, and we'll say something like, your tweet has been successfully added, period. And here, I could say something like equals flash at position success. And so this is a new tweet. Your tweet has been successfully added. I still don't want these things to be unconditionally present. on my page here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the following. I'm going to see the best way of doing this. I could do this. Success. No, I know what I'll do. Flash.each do, which will be the type of the flash and the message for the flash. And then display the message here. And then I'm going to have to look up in Haml how I can sort of dynamically create this class here based on the type. So I want it to be, if like the type is success, I want it to be a paragraph of class success. If the type is error, I want it to be a paragraph of class error. And then I want the message always to display. Right now, it'll just always say success. So it should still work. We should be able to go and test this out and have it work. So let's go and look at that. Was this successful? Good. If we have an error, like a blank one, no more success message. Good. I'll have to make an error message as well, but I'm going to quickly look up how to, with Haml, make a dynamic class like that. Here it is. Here it is. So I use what looks like a hash. So and I'll say class is type. Go back over here, or here, more like it. Another success. And if I view source, the class is success. That's good. For errors, we can also set a flash message. The only difference is flash is typically meant to be used around a redirect. It actually uses cookies to keep this message around for one redirect, and then it removes it from the browser cookies after that. With render, I'm not going to be actually redirecting, so we have to use flash in a slightly different way, which is flash.now error, meaning I'm about to display this error right now. And now I'm going to take the error message that I've got here, and I'm going to paste it in there. So when I'm using flash with a redirect, I just access it directly. When I'm about to render the flash right away, I say flash.now. And now when I do this, sorry, tweets must be between 1 and 140 characters. And if I view source, it properly has a class of error. Now when it comes time to styling this website, I can style paragraphs of class error in red and paragraphs of class success in green. The other thing you may have noticed is, like, when an error occurs, my tweet button moves to the next line. That's just a styling issue. That's because my input gets wrapped in a div with a class of field with errors, so that I could potentially sort of highlight in red any of the elements of my form that might be an error, so that I can fix that with styling later on.
You can just make it inline, right?
You got it. Yeah. So I'd make it like an inline element. So as far as what I wanted to accomplish today, I think I've done what I need to do. So just to review again what I did here, I'm looping through the flash hash. It's a hash, so I can loop through and get access to each key and value. The type is going to be either error or success, depending on how I'm using it here, or here. And the message is always going to be the message that I've signed to it. And then I've used this style of syntax to set the class attribute of the paragraph tag I'm creating to the type of message. And then inside of there, I'm echoing out the message itself. The view is always being yielded below. There is a shortcut for dealing with the Flash in terms of redirects. I believe I can do this for the redirect. Let's see if this works properly. I think that'll set it directly into the Flash. I thought wrong. There was some kind of shortened form. I'm not going to remember it now off the top of my head, and I won't make you watch me find the solution. Maybe it was with render. I'm sure we could find that in the Rails guide for controllers. The render command. Flash.now. Yes, okay. I'll look it up and find it at a later date for you guys. Okay, so I have a little bit more to commit to GitHub. If I ever want to know what's changed, I can do a git diff and it'll show me exactly. So you can see I set up the Flash messages in my controller. I set up my display of the Flash messages in my application layout. And so git add, git commit -m, added Flash messages for successful tweets as well as validation errors. And I can push that up to GitHub. Okay, I think that's enough for today. We don't have too much left to finish the clone of this particular sort of single user Twitter. All that remains is the idea of bringing in some styling. And so we're going to use Sass for our styling. And we're mainly just going to use the styling that I've already created for this particular PHP version. We just might convert some of it into a bit more sort of Sass related rules. And so the next screencast will be fairly short, unless I can think of something else to add to it. But that said, we've got it working. Oh, I see. Look at, that was what happened with that success message. It ended up there. Again, I'm just going to make sure everything works according to how I want it to. This tweet should be posted, and this one shouldn't. Perfect. Okay, so I will stop the screencast now.